Okay, great. Sorry. All right. Well, I think given that it's now 12:01 and we have a very chatty group of panelists here, I'm not gonna delay too much getting us started here. So first of all, welcome to those of you who are already joining. Glad everyone was able to make a time out of their day. Hope your lunch is warm and you're able to eat along as we discuss some interesting topics around the future of the animation industry with three fantastic panels today. My name is Ben McAvoy. For those of you who don't know me, I'm an executive producer at a production studio called Friends and Enemies. I've been working on the CASO board now for a few years, largely around what we're doing right now, which is having or leading conversations with community members around topics that matter the most to our membership, which includes, of course, the studios and the folks working within those studios. So I appreciate that we're able to get this particular conversation going today. This is actually the first of what we're hoping will be a series of 2024 conversations that really focus on the future. I mean, at this point, if anyone's been watching these webinars, that is more or less the shtick for me is where are we going? And as an organization with CASO, we're also trying to help bring some insights into and some expertise to the conversation to support all the studios around what next. Last year, we saw probably arguably one of the hardest years as an industry over the past maybe 2 decades or more. Quite a surprise. And I think a lot of different factors that caused disruption in ways that were hard to anticipate, especially following the pandemic, which in its own way caused a lot of its own challenges. So 2020s are just really off to a great start. But now we're in 2024. It seems like some of the tides are changing back towards the positive direction that we want them to be in. If anyone joined us for our session back in November, there was a lot of good news coming out of the studios that were taking part there, but still a lot of caution and a lot of, I think, managed approaches to how we're going to continue to grow and move forward, knowing that it hasn't quite gotten back to where we were before. Today's conversation is going to narrow in. This is a session on what we're calling next gen skills. Really, while I'm having a hard time, we've asked the organizers and to help us understand, do we have a lot of artists on the call? Do we have a lot of management on the call? Seems like there's a mixture. The goal here is largely to talk about, as organizations, as studios, what are the skills that are going to be needed? Where are we training on skills? Because we know that everything's changing and new skills will be emerging. Some skills will no longer be needed. New technologies are going to impact. And also just the way that we're working is changing so dramatically. It's important for studios to be able to adapt and grow because skills, of course, are what help your resources, your people thrive and your studio succeed. So on this call, we have three really fantastic people with, I hope, a wealth of expertise we're going to bring to the table, and we can get it all in 55 minutes I've now given us. So I'd like to everyone to just maybe we can go around Robin really quickly and introduce our panelists and just give us a quick background of who you are and what you're hoping to get out of the session today. Why don't we start with my good friend, Lance Lafort, who's on my left.
Hi, Ben. Thanks again for inviting us to the panel. My name is Lance Lafort. I run a small consulting business primarily with animation, visual effects, AR, VR, video games. We recruit and we do some management consulting to those industries. I'm a former HR director in a number of studios. And that's it. Over to the next person.
Sue, why don't we go to Sue?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Well, thank you for inviting for this webinar. Happy to be here. I'm head of talent acquisition at Guru Studios, been in the industry for a little bit over 16 years, not too long. Hoping to be able to share a lot of great insights and things that are to come in this great year, I hope, in the 2024.
It's going to be great. So I
Yep.
like this positive affirmations. We're going to get there. It's going to be amazing.
Yep.
Last but not least, Lawrence.
Hi, I'm Lawrence Smet. I'm the head of technology at VFX Studio in Toronto. I'm also a teacher of 15 years at Centennial College. I teach VFX and animation, and I'm on the board of managers VS Toronto and the Educational Council. So by day I yell at computers, but by night I'm really keen on helping improve our talent pool and help artists out. So
great. So we have really nice balance here of in studio. I mean, all three of you have excellent expertise and experience in studio, largely around people and culture, but also even technology. Lance, now that you're on the outside, you're going to bring an interesting perspective in terms of multi-studio, cross-industry needs and interests and trends. Sue, you're with Guru, arguably one of our biggest studios in Toronto and Ontario right now. and not the canary in the mine shaft, but certainly a canary to be looking at in terms of how's Guru doing, because that's probably going to be helpful. And
Yeah.
Lawrence, of course, your role with VES is fantastic because you bring a really strong VFX viewpoint, but also VFX, who, from my familiarity, is certainly trying to remain on the forefront of how do we work and what do we do. So it's not just here's what's worked in the past, but also how can we adapt and adopt to new technologies and new methodologies, which I know you're probably a big part of spearheading. So I want to start on the ground floor. We don't need to go over this too much because I think a lot of us have lived the experience now over the past 14, 18 months around what's happening. But I think it's super important to just give us a sense of the market forces that are shaping where we've been. And maybe from your perspective as well, what you're seeing just at the 100,000 foot. So I started us on the ground floor, and then I've thrown us into a rocket ship up to 100,000 feet around just what's happening in the industry from your vantage point writ large that's influencing how studios are operating. And it can be from the dimension of people and culture, but also could maybe it can pepper in areas that may also be relevant, like technology or production styles, things like that. Lawrence, because you went last, I'm actually going to start with you first. I'd love to just get your viewpoint of what are you seeing right now in the world from a VFX, VES, Lawrence Summit standpoint.
Sure. I think there's a lot of chaos right now, and there's a ton of misinformation, and everybody's kind of predicting the future. And there's a lot of very strong opinions of, oh, this is the way it's going. And I think if we look at that historically, it's very hard to actually predict. I think what we do know is change is accelerating. And that kind of really adds some uncertainty to the mix. So where we're looking, kind of getting the feeling that we're going to have to be more nimble and more able to flex when it comes to meeting the job requirements, whether it's budget or technology or new challenges. So when it comes to talent, we're really looking for people who can be more innovative, who can pivot more, who can adapt quickly. And I think to me that's the solution to embracing that chaos, because we really don't know where it's going to end up.
Sue, from your perspective, it sounds
Uh,
like
yeah, I echo what Lawrence is saying. It's like there's a lot of uncertainty. People are like really afraid of what's coming up. Like we always had those up and down in the industry, but we were hit very hard last year. So a lot of people are asking what's happening, what's going on, are productions continuing, are people still hiring people? And from the guru's perspective, what I can tell you is that luckily we haven't stopped recruiting talents. What happened is that we became a little bit more diligent and going through more like with more eyes on to see who will be better qualified for that position, because we know that the requirements for the clients are going up with all the things that are going on, right? So there's a little bit of more caution
mm,
and thinking about what to do, where to do, and how to do. It's not only on the recruitment side, but on the production too. Like not
right.
only the group, I believe a lot of companies in the industry are starting to see what is expecting us for this year, what kind of productions are coming up. But when exactly it's happening, like Lawrence said, we don't know. But we know it's coming. It's about like having the patience and be prepared when it comes, because if you are not prepared, the doors will be open, but you won't realize the doors are open, and then you
Mm.
miss timing again, right? So
And I've got a kind of a quick follow-ups before I shift over to Lance for his perspective, Sue. But there's two sides to that. Part of it is the diligence that you're talking about. I'm curious about, let's say pre 2023, so 2022. I was doing panels with some of you guys where it's like, how do we find more talent? And now it's like, okay, well, that's a different story. We still want to retain the talent. I mean, from CASO's perspective, we want to keep them in Ontario as best we can. So
mhm.
that's a challenge. But you're also then saying, okay, well, the diligence is important. We maybe have to de-risk some of what we're doing when it comes to recruiting and talent retention. I'm curious about what's changed in the projects that you're seeing, or if you guys are just hedging on once things start happening, we want to be at the front, ready to go. I'm not sure if that question makes sense to you, but just 2022 and now 2024, what's driving that diligence? What's driving that de-risking in a way?
So I think the easy way to put it is like a couple of years ago, before the double strike that we had last year, it was more about like where are the talents concentrated? Where can we find them? Who is available? Now it's more about who is available and properly qualified. Who is ready to be? Who has those points that we're looking for that specific production? And of course, like you mentioned, like CASO, we want to retain the talents within Ontario, but we understand that a lot of people are starting to migrate out of the province. So we're checking, is that really what's happening? Is that how we need to adjust ourselves? How do we make the clients understand that's what's going on? Is the trend or is something that will come back? So there's still a lot of findings going out because again, we are all going through this as for the first time, right? So like it's the first pandemic, which we hope is the last one. We don't hope that the double strike happens once again, like too soon too, right?
Yeah.
And so we're building all the data to see what to do and how can be done. Like so it's more about like, no, let's just like in the past it would be like, okay, let's just find that person. Let's make sure that we can lock that person. Now it's more like, okay, we want to make sure that we bring that person, but is that person the one for the production? And then it's the same thing with the same thing with the productions, right? The companies are really looking to bring those businesses in a way that they can really trust and be reliable in retaining the talents and the production for a certain period, right?
Right. And I'm writing down like spin-off questions here, but I want to give Lance a moment as well, just to talk about, Lance, you sit in a very unique perspective, being someone who interfaces with many different studios, like I said, different industries as well, and also with a lot of talent. So you know a lot of the people in the world itself. What is your view of what's happening today? Like, what does it look like from your perspective across that kind of landscape?
Yeah, I think, Ben, if we go back to your sort of 30,000 foot sort of view for a second, we've seen, if you look back since streaming started, right? There's a convergence of the quality of episodic versus feature because they used to be distinctly different, radically different, right? I'm working on a feature, it takes longer. We need a different group of artists to do the feature versus I'm doing an episodic kids TV show. That's a whole different group of people. And those communities didn't cross-pollinate very much. They were very distinct groups, right? And so then we get this erosion of cable, the advent of the streamers, and then a streamer war, right? And that's what we saw the last couple of years basically was before all the stuff in 2023, there was more content being produced than people to actually even consume the content. And so globally, we had this stripping of the labor force everywhere. There was not enough people. You couldn't even go to Asia and find a service studio because they were backed up a year or more. So, we've really come through a boom time and now the bust of last year and a reallocation of a lot of stuff. And from every indication I've seen in the reports I'm reading, the people doing studies on this right now, 2024 didn't get out of the gates quickly. It's not a quick regrow of the industry. It's going to be fits and starts, I think, for the first couple quarters this year, and then start to build hopefully by summer. So that's from my perspective, and it literally was 2021, I think May, when Netflix reported its first quarter when they lost 200,000 subscribers, and then the next quarter they lost 1 million subscribers. That to me was the canary in the coal mine because all the other streamers took their foot off the gas at that point. They went, oh, I can't get any more subscribers, or we're just going to cannibalize each other's subscriber list from here forward. And families that had 2 or 3 channels in the house were like, we don't need all this. Like, it was a great novelty for a few years, but now we're like, do we really need 3 streaming platforms in the house? Because the kids all watch just 1 or 1.5, And so the maturity of that market happened and the saturation of that market happened. So that's a 30,000 look that's impacted all of us below that, right? And I think what I'm seeing now from studio to studio is there are people like looking for Unreal Engine as a skill set, right? And that's new for some people and it's old for other people, but we have the convergence of game technology and game engines impacting VFX and animation now, which years ago we talked about it, now it's a real thing. And so it's challenging for any artist or anybody in the industry trying to train themselves because it almost feels like they've got to learn a lot of stuff. And if you really want to be in this industry, I think you're going to have to dig deep a lot and keep training. And I say that strangely in the fact that we've always done that, right? Artists that want to be in this industry and technical people that want to be in this industry are always constantly learning, but you can't really kind of do a 9 to 6 or whatever the hours are and go home and not go, I've got to get into a class. You got to get into a class now, it feels like. And if you're in one camp firmly, like highly technical or highly artistic, I always recommend, if you can, right brain, left brain, switch to the other side a little bit, learn a little bit more, then you can communicate better. Also, you understand possibly their tool sets a little bit more. Therefore, in an industry that is highly technical and highly artistic at the same time, you're able to probably add more value rather than just saying, I'm just going to hang out in this camp because this is where I live and die on this island. I don't think we're in a time where you could afford to do that, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I 100% agree. And I think, it's two challenges. One thing we know, we don't know where this is going to go, but we do know that we're going to need to do more with less. And that's kind of a given. So we're asking ourselves, how can we do that, both from a technology perspective and a talent perspective? But if I look at it from like the teaching side, I have this real urge to pump a lot of stuff into my course, because I think what's changed is, as Lance said, you can come out of school, get enough knowledge to get a job, and then continue to learn as you go in the job. I think what's changing is it's harder and harder to get that wide pool of knowledge you need to be efficient in a studio on graduating. And so I think that's a challenge for the educational industry, and the software industry to try and help. Because you sit there, how many apps does a student need to know, right? Now it used to be like, learn Maya and Photoshop back in the day. And now it's like 7 or 8 things. So,
Right.
But at the same time, I think if you kind of create that environment where, okay, it's another piece of software, it's all doing the same things, the buttons are in a different place, but if we think about the concepts, then we're in a place where it's not so scary to learn something new. And I think that's something that could help us get there.
And
Go ahead.
sorry, just to jump in, Laura, I was going to say, like, studios for a long time, a lot of companies, a lot of industries try to avoid the training piece because, if we're recruiting, you'd rather get someone who already knows the skills rather than spend the time for them to ramp up. But I think if we're going into this, brave new world of more challenges, more training is going to happen. And even sort of these like seminars, we're not going to put you in through a whole semester, but here's a 6-week boot camp on whatever. And so that people can get at least basic knowledge to propel themselves forward. But I truly think we're going to have to see more training, and also, all the AI discussions that are going on, that's going to impact so many different things. Pluses and minuses, there's going to be pros and cons about how those things get implemented. But it does feel to me like, to Lauren's comment about doing more with less, some of the tools will, eliminate, let's say, roto or something like that. Those things will be automated or somewhat more automated than they are today. Yeah. Anyways, I'll turn it back over to the panel.
Well, just
Sue, go
going a
ahead.
little bit back on the trainings that the students could offer, not only to students, but the team members. I think it's important to note that before the pandemic, there used to be like regular workshops, lunch and learn, and seminars and training among the people, which have tagged because of the pandemic, which is starting to come back, of course. Like, for example, I won't speak for all the students, but I know that a lot of studios, they do have this deep partnership with each single college, and they try to give a little bit of like in-depth uh, uh, insights of how really the production works. And I know that a lot of the curriculum of different colleges have changed, so they can really cover like 2D production, 3D productions, the tools that are used, like Lawrence, you mentioned. Before it was Photoshop, Maya, Nuke, and that was all. And now we know that goes way beyond that, right? And they are being exposed to that. And with studios visiting them, having all those like, or attempting to have those workshop or like classes presentation, they're exposing them ahead of time to what the world is prepared for them.
As someone who also has worked for 16 years in post-secondary, I can also bring a perspective of how challenging it is, and Lawrence probably lives and breathes this as well, where year 1 of a 3-year program, I'm going to teach you a software. By year 4, when you've graduated, that software is now 3 versions out. And in the rapid change of technology that we're facing today, it may already have been integrated into something new. It may be, it's evolved completely to the point where it's new again. And so how fast are studios adopting it? How fast can schools? Because as you know, schools can't just on a dime change some of their curriculum. So the challenge becomes not just teaching technical skills, but teaching those skills that maybe embrace more about technological adaptivity, problem solving, understanding how they work so that you can move between platforms and software.
Yeah.
But I'm going to shift the lens here because I know that we've had conversations around the education system, of which I've got very strong views, and I think they're all very positive. In that, I think education system does a really good job of trying to baseline and create foundational work. And there's only so much that can happen in 3 years. But then it turns to, well, the vast majority of people who are going to be impacted by what we're experiencing in this moment are probably people mid-career. So these are people who are 5, 10, 15 years into their career, who are either looking to adapt. And I'm going to really try my best to avoid AI because it is a bit of a drum I like to beat too often, but it certainly has an impact. But even things like Maya is no longer being used as much, or maybe people are moving away from Toon Boom to Cell Action, or you guys are exploring entirely different platforms. How do these people, as I think Lance said, go from a 9 to 6 where you're going to be working all day, and then for the most part, when you're mid-career, your life stage is probably families as well, going home and then continuing education. Um, um, there's opportunities in continuing education through the colleges, of course, and online. Lots of great programs. But the studios, and Sue, I'm gonna start with you on this one, and then Lawrence, I'll spin over to you. What do we see studios doing, like Guru, especially when you don't have a lot of work? You probably don't have a reason to put people on payroll, but you know that skills development may be a critical aspect of keeping people ready for when you need to kind of hit go. How does that work for you guys, or what are you guys exploring, or what are you even seeing in the world around skills development and support?
So in our studio specifically, and that's the one that I can speak better, is that we have a regular workshops, lunch and learn, training sessions, and the most important, peer coaching. Like we have our amazing team members that are always with like hands-on, like whenever anyone is, although it's a virtual environment, we're like Guru is as a remote first studio. So we're still in the virtual environment. Whenever someone is struggling, we have that catch right away and we go, okay, who would be able to guide that? Who would be able to coach? And then we go through this process, right? Of course, if you have been coaching a person for like 10, 20, 30 times and you don't see any progress, then there's another conversation to follow up. But then usually the peer coaching, our leadership working with our artists, that works pretty well. And of course, we always, like I mentioned previously, the workshops and lunch learns to see what is going on, what are the things that we can bring in, not only that work related directly or indirect, but indirectly too, that can boost your like interest to invest more on you, and then evolving your skill set helps too, right? So that's all those things that Guru has been implementing, and we are still going on with that.
Thank you, Sue, and it's great to hear. I mean, it's a tricky balance, right?
It
As a small
is.
business owner, it's like I want to help the people around me grow, but there's also fundamentally at the end of the day, there's like a money in, money out situation where
It's
that's a fine knife's edge, right?
it's business at the end of the day, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we're not a philanthropic organization, so we need
No,
to work based. Yes, so we need to work based on how things work accordingly.
yeah.
But then at the same time, doesn't mean that we're turning our backs right away the moment that we see that someone is not doing the proper thing, right?
And Dan Mockery's on the chat here, just putting some thoughts in the mix, which I think are really interesting. Like we can't ignore the work from home dynamic. You're talking about peer led training. The apprenticeship mentorship model that I think really has been a core for continuous training and learning for decades.
Yes.
Where work from home has really, really undermined the ability for people who are maybe younger to learn from those who are older, but also just to create opportunities. Like I've worked in studios where we did lunch and learns, or these are just ways to squeeze in insights and give people the opportunity to learn without necessarily kind of removing them from the production and training them up specifically. Lawrence, I'm curious because you actually, before we started this, provide some questions of your own within the
Yeah.
framework that I'm currently not even referencing. So yay for us. But you talked about the idea of continuous improvement within the studio as well, which is sort of, I think, an adjacent to what Sue's talking about around peer-led learning. Like, can you describe maybe, is VFX doing anything around, that kind of lean, continuous improvement, Kaizen approach to organizational skills training, like making sure it's not just individual led, but maybe cultural?
That's it. And I think, I think there's kind of two parts. There's dedicated training programs, and then there's the culture you build that kind of does it itself.
Mhm.
And I will say, as a startup, I mean, we're young, we're 3 years into it. We're not really a startup anymore, but people got used to change, right? Especially when you're in a startup. Like it came natural that, like, okay, next week Lawrence is going to come and say, hey guys, okay, we're going to do this way now because we have this new technology or pipeline or something like that. So I think and that's worked really well for us, and we're trying to push that forward, so that creating that culture of kind of embracing change and discussing innovation at every level is something we try to encourage as leadership. And I think that's really helped. Like, when we have a new project, um, we sit down with the leads and go, okay, how can we approach this? And is there something we should be implementing or teaching or learning to help us attack the challenges in this project? And to the point that Sue made about, and you made about, like, downtime is expensive. When you tie that learning to a project, to a business goal, then now you're saving money. Now you're having return on investment as opposed to it just being an additional cost. So I think that that's kind of the best thing I can suggest is to try and look at the projects you have, identify the opportunities for innovation, and then encourage leadership and the leads and team leads to have those discussions with the artist, and listen, right? And you can't, you also have to back that up, right? You have to have things like postmortems. You have to have weekly discussions where leadership is listening and hearing what comes back from that.
Um, it's great to hear because I think it removes the burden on the individual to say it's up to you. And it actually sort of shifts the view onto the studio to say culture, which we've talked about culture for years now. I mean, well over the course past these webinars, its culture has become, capital C, a big important thing at studios. But that culture is not just about ping pong table in the break room, casual Fridays, although I think nowadays we should probably have formal Fridays. It's really about attitude development, about creating a sense of momentum around things that matter beyond just delivering on the project. Mental health and wellness has been a big part of it, but also continuous learning. Lance is busy in the chat, so thank you, Lance, for taking some of these questions. I do want to shift to you because as someone who, again, evaluates across multiple studios, multiple disciplines, I'm curious about, are you seeing any kind of shifts? You mentioned a bit about technology, and maybe you can start there, but expand around the shifts in skill requirements, skill needs that you're starting to see from studios that maybe kind of indicate where some of the larger trends are pointing when it comes to, well, what really matters. And I'll just add on to that, when Sue is talking about the due diligence around roles, evaluating opportunities for bringing in talent, my guess is this is not just technical expertise. There's probably other dimensions. I'm curious if there's something that you're seeing as a common trend or trends that are maybe kind of pointing to some of those indicators around what skills are starting to become more valued, or what are studios starting to evaluate outside of just core technical expertise?
That's a great question, Ben. And I think it's multi-layered. I can give you just some
Start with the
in
icing.
the last few months, on the production side, I'll start there. Some studios have a very distinct kind of coordinator, APM, PM, line producer, executive producer, somewhere in there, hopefully bidding producer, or it's done at a different department like production accounting. But I'm finding, again, this kind of consolidation or pressure on the industry. A lot of my clients have been saying, I need a bidding producer, but I also need that bidding producer to run a show. And 10 years ago, that was not the case. It's more siloed kind of thing. Oh, that's a bidding producer. They just do bids, talk to clients, get the bids done. Again, depending on the size of the studio. But there is this kind of, like I jokingly think about this as the age of the MacGyver, in the sense that, people will have to have their Swiss Army knife and be able to do multiple things. I'm just staffing a show right now where we've been looking for Unreal generalists who can take a shot from previs right through to final rendering. And in some studios, that would be, no, we've got 6 different departments that do that. But if it was a guerrilla style small gaming studio, then you might have a tech artist that goes, yeah, I know a little bit about every one of those facilities and I can probably get it up to a certain level, but then someone polishes it, right, for a final render. But I'm seeing more of that generalist skill set. And again, big studio does need a generalist. Small studio definitely needs generalists, right? So that's something that, and again, the Unreal thing keeps coming up in my world where I keep seeing it more and more. Have they got Unreal? How much Unreal experience? What have they done? Have they got there's different things through some of the games companies now where you can get a scholarship and learn a little bit more about the basics of it, things like that. So, and on the engineering side, and Lawrence could probably speak to this more than I could, but many engineers I know are loving the fact that they can do basic scripting for tools with some AI prompts that they would normally do that work late at night when they're tired, or they'd hire a junior to do it, or there's a number of scenarios, but they're loving the fact that some of the stuff they could program by hand doesn't need to be programmed by hand. They can basically write scripts and automate things quickly for artists. So that's new. And again, I think people just need to be open-minded, not fearful of new tech, because if you're fearful of it, someone else is not going to be, and they're going to learn it and potentially get that job you didn't get. So I really think people right now have to be really open-minded to the change that's occurring and dig in, really look at can I find a facility or somebody to teach me this stuff, or because if it's a challenging marketplace, the person that has spent even personal time on these things. I can remember years ago being in a game studio, we were quite often interested in what the coders were doing in their off time, because some of them as a passion project would be building some amazing thing in C++ or something that actually impacted their work, and they were learning on their own. But when we were hiring, we had a very small engine team at the time, and they specifically sought out people who were doing this, whether they had the job or not. It was their passion. And so I think, again, it's those sort of things. It's hard in the sense you have to really commit yourself to this industry. If you want to be in it, you have to kind of make it your thing. It's not a 9 to 5 thing unless you've got on a second or third season of a television show that's running smoothly and all the kinks are worked out. First season is the challenging one most of the time, first or second season. But so in the time we're in right now, I think you have to be resourceful. I think someone else, maybe Lauren said nimble, and be constantly learning, or, go at it every second week, take a sprint, but take weekend courses or evening courses. I think we've all got stories. I've got stories of being on a movie where we had a technical application nobody loved, and one guy went home in the evenings and started just teaching himself and going on forums and learning it. By the end of the movie, he was the specialist on that one piece of software, and then he got hired after that to be the specialist again at another studio. So he wasn't afraid of the tech. He just went home and thought, I've got to figure this out. Right. And he became the go-to guy in the studio for those questions. So hope that helps.
And it's super useful. Lawrence, go ahead.
I love that, because it's, there's so much more educational material. It's so much easier to train yourself now. And I'll give you a great example. Like, we had a situation where we were moving data from one source to another, and the data didn't match up in Excel. And so, like, okay, my first thought was, okay, let's talk to our development team, maybe they can write someone. But one of our producers was like, you know what? I think I'll just see if I can get something out of Chat GPT. Now, we have very strict rules about the usage of AI products. But if you're just kind of asking it for reference advice, just, okay, how would I convert something like this to something like this? And it gave an expression that just plugged right into the spreadsheet and solved the problem easily, right? And so I think there's almost no excuse now in kind of embracing new technologies and learning yourself to solve smaller, more high frequency technology challenges, so that your technology team can focus on the bigger problems. And I think that's how we do that kind of, okay, we need to do more with less. I think that's one of the key elements to doing this.
It's important to note that you cannot get too accommodated. Like, let's be honest, we're in an industry that it's fast changing, fast learning. There's a lot of technology that comes every day. So if you think you're good enough for what you're doing today, you might not be tomorrow. So you need to continue learning what's coming out. How can you improve your work yourself? Because at the end of the day, the hours that you're putting out of your working hours are for your own growth. Like you end up helping the studio. However, it's your own grow, your own skill set that you're getting better, right? So that's one thing that we really need to learn, and then we really need to let people know about it. Like we there's a lot of people who are starting to, I noticed that they're starting to invest in themselves, learning new skill set with a little bit of a lack of work that is going on right now, which I think is pretty smart. You're using the time to really learn and be prepared. Again, what I mentioned previously, be prepared for whenever the time comes. Like, and even if you're with a studio currently, there's a lot of tools that can be updated and integrated new tools, softwares, and techniques that you might not be aware of it. That's why you really need to keep growing your skill set, learning what is coming out, be prepared. Like you don't want to wait sitting for your studio to come to, hey, you know what, we have to teach you that, and you're like, why? But instead of saying the why, the question mark, you could be the one who said, oh, I think I know what you're mentioning, what you're insinuating, what you're trying to say. I know a little bit about that. Maybe we can work in together, and then things get easier. You know.
Yeah, and you know, I think coming back to what Lance said about passion, I think that's kind of a critical element in those people who will do that without you even having to ask them. You know, we had, I remember when we were starting the company, we were hiring IT people. And so we're interviewing all these people, and we met this one guy, and he had like a really homemade looking computer in the background, like gaming rig kind of thing. And so we asked him, he's like, did you build that yourself? And he's like, oh yeah, I built my own machine from scratch. And then immediately the head of IT texts me and she's like, we're hiring this guy. And that was one of the best hires we've made. And this person has just been fantastic the whole time. And the conversation with him is always, I'm always asking myself, am I in this person's way as a leader? Like, what do you need? What are you interested in? Where do you want to go? What can I do to help? I mean, that's it. So if you can find those passionate people.
Ben,
Go ahead.
sorry, I just wanted to add one more point too. You know, to Lawrence's point there about, you know, getting out of someone's way, I think is a great sort of thing. Like hire really sharp people and then just, you know, there's a term called servant leader, right? If you're the leader, just make sure you're serving that person so they can flourish, right? And I think one of the things we haven't talked about is leadership skills, quite frankly, and communication skills. And a lot of times and I don't want to say just this industry. I think there's a lot of industries going through change right now. And I think there's some of them that suffer under some of the same sort of paradigms. So I don't want to sort of say, you know, it's just all about us. There are a lot of industries that are also, you know, working through this, but people often get promoted. They're the, whatever happens, they go, this is the person, we're going to make them the lead. This is the person, we're going to make them the supervisor. And they get the title, but there's no real training. They've had training on skills. They've had training on software. They've had training on all sorts of things. They might have trained their eye as an artist to be able to, you know, light something properly or put in the right rim light. And there's a whole bunch of science and art that goes behind all of the visual stuff that we do. Rarely do I see leadership training. And, you know, I was on a seminar the other day and someone said 40% of my job now is managing the team, 40%. And no one gave me any indication on how I do that. They just said, figure it out. Oh, you've kind of been doing it organically already. You'll be fine. But you know, there are mindsets and there are changes in what you do every day when you are just taking orders from someone else or working collaboratively with the team or now having to run the team. That's a different headspace. And that leader has to scratch away enough personal time and professional time to make sure he or she is saying, how are they going to understand what I'm saying here? And how are they going to take it? You know, how are they going to receive this information? Am I saying the right thing? Are people learning the right way? Because people learn, some of them are visual learners, some of them are auditory, you know, so I guess if I could put just a pin in that leadership training, it would be great to have more of that. And even client training. How do I deal with clients? You know, some people are sort of born, sort of, it feels like they have a gift for it. Other ones, you know, level up into it and do very well. But there's coaching moments there, I think, that could be added to a lot of things.
And that's where the soft skills kicks in, actually, right? It's not only about your experience or your seniority or your skill set. it's soft skills, which is the skill, part of the skill set, but it's soft skills counts a lot because like Lawrence was mentioning, Lance was mentioning, we have certain, not only in this industry, but we have leaders who are promoted to leaders because they have been for too long on the senior position. And that's the next step of their career. But are they the real ones who are prepared? So we need to check. That's the due diligence that comes in, right? We need to check if they have that qualification. Sometimes people are really good, exceptional seniors, but as a leaders, that might be a different story.
I have a question for you guys. This is fantastic. You guys have basically answered all of my questions that I already had here. So we're going to burn through Dan Mockery's questions next because he's got great insights as well. I don't know how Dan types this fast, by the way. It's impressive. I've been talking about a term, general specialists and special generalists, which is sort of like we've always kind of defined you're either a specialist and you're really deep and narrow, or you're a generalist and you're really broad and wide. And so oftentimes you'll find a good balance of the two. In my view, what I'm seeing a lot of these technology being kind of like a proxy for AI, but automations, and the sorts of technologies that allow for specialist tasks to be managed more easily, but also generalist tasks. So I think about some of the tools we use, which are, Lance and I are joking about our AIs joining meetings to record things, right? It's like, well, that's kind of like, this is a general skill set that's being covered by some tool now. I need to get more nuanced in how I view myself as an art, as a person in the world. And that this idea of a special generalist, someone who really gets deep into something, but understands maybe adjacencies that are important, those T-shaped people, or general specialists, right? People who really know, I'm getting it always mixed up, so I should probably get rid of these terms because they're too confusing. But it's basically about you need to be more than just one thing. You need to be able to kind of reach across. And a large amount of time that comes from leadership, communication, organization, time management, and problem solving and adaptation. So the question becomes, where do these things get taught? And I remember my very first argument with my wife, who was a creative director, was around she was upset that someone who was junior to her had left earlier than her. And I made the case of, well, this person finished their job and do what they were supposed to on time. Yes, they did. But I was told you don't leave until your creative director leaves. And of course, this is like 15 years ago. And Lawrence is laughing because he knows her. But the insight we both kind of came to on this was, if someone's doing the job right, that's fine. Why should they be doing what someone ahead of them did? But unfortunately, most leadership training comes from maybe almost like a learn by modeling approach that sometimes comes with a lot of baggage and bad habits. So when we're talking, and I'm looking at what Dan's posting here because it's kind of related to this, the people who really matter are the people who have some of these skills, because they're going to first of all be the ones who hold projects together, they bring people together, they solve problems, and oftentimes they'll elevate quickly into leadership roles. How do we give them the training they need so that they're supported in a way that allows them to thrive versus develop bad habits, or make massive mistakes where organizationally they go, well, we thought you were leadership quality and you're out. And just to put my pin on that, there's a great video circulating right now about Steve Jobs, who talks about what was a big thing he learned from Apple. This is in his transitory period between when he left and came back. And he said, the thing I learned the most was to view people in terms of years, not in terms of outcomes. So it's like, I know this person made a mistake today, but if I believe they're the one who's going to make the team successful, how do I help them learn and invest? Which is easy to do when you have a lot of runway and capital to invest in these people, harder to do when you're on a project basis. So I guess I'm going to maybe Sue and Lawrence, but Lance, you've been in this position in studios for decades as well. Like, how do these skills get taught in a way, or how do we encourage people to develop these skills? What are you guys implementing, or where would you point people to? I'm going to start with you, Lawrence, because I think you were I think we had Sue and Lance just now.
Well, I think, you have to have that person has to have that desire to do that first.
Mm.
So you really have to create that culture. And I always kind of talk about 3 levels. There's like level 1 is like, okay, I come in and do my job to go home. Level 2 is I come in, I do my job, but I think about how things could be improved for my team and the people around me immediately. And then level 3 is I think about, I do my job, I think about my team, but I also think about what does the success of the company look like? And I think kind of encouraging people to aspire towards that level 2 and level 3, kicks that conversation off and opens the door to having that training. But then you really have to come in and support it because, to Lance and Sue's point, as a startup, we've thrust a lot of young people into leadership roles and really haven't had the opportunity yet to train them properly. And this is an ongoing conversation. We want to get in there and provide them with like directed, legitimate training to help them be better leaders for their teams, because I don't think you get that organically. I mean, over time, many years, but I think you can really jumpstart that. But none of that happens without that kind of passion to be that person.
And Sue, I'm going to flip it to you because I get a sense that this is something you're aware of as well. You talked at the very beginning of the call about the due diligence and really digging into who are we hiring. Lawrence had a great anecdote there around building a computer in the background, and maybe there's cues, but that's kind of like a lightning strike moment. That's not something that was actively sought out as much as just noticed. Do you guys have mechanisms that allow you to identify these sorts of cues in the people you're hiring or even the people internally to say, this person is demonstrating something that actually fits into those dimensions, not just the technical skills, but these soft skills?
So before answering that, I think it's important to note that whenever we're hiring someone or we are promoting anyone internally, we need to know that there needs to be some kind of a willingness, desire from the person, and communication coming out from those person. Because studios, like, we will try to be upfront and be able to guesstimate who would be willing to, or what kind of help you are looking for, or what kind of training you're looking for. But then you coming back to us saying, hey, so I might be looking into expanding my skill set. For example, the generalist specialist versus specialist generalist, right? Like, for example, if you have a really great, let's go layout artist, and then he comes, you know what? I have done my quota of the week. I noted that there's certain room for me to learn different in another department. And I'm wondering if the studio would be open to put me in a training for that one. No studio will come to that person and say, no, we don't want to. They will, oh, of course, let's work on that plan and this transition in that learning process. And that's where we see if the person is willing to learn, has the initiative, it's good in opening communication, and what kind of a skill set the person is presenting, and it will be evolving it. And that's where the due diligence comes. It's more on the communication. Like, there's more, like, with the virtual reality, virtual environment that we're exposed to, there was a higher demand in communication. Like, we are trying to have more communication than ever because there's no physical contact with the person. So we try to have all those information shared as maximum as possible. And that's how we do know when, or we believe to know when the person would be qualified or not, if this artist would be a good fit or not, or if that production would be a good one for the production or not, right?
Lance, I'm going to spit. I got a nice little segue for you here and a little bit of a plug for you. I know that part of what you've been doing is coaching around interviews. So kind of a double-edged, this is like a 7-layer dip of question for you. But so you are working with talent at times to help them in terms of not just these pieces we're talking about, but really like nail the interview. In today's virtual work from home, hybrid, environment, that is critical because what we're doing right now, we've all kind of had to learn new skills about how to feel normal sitting in rooms by ourselves talking to our computers while our partners are sitting next to us like, I don't know what half this conversation. That's really stressful already. So there's a layer, I imagine, in terms of how you would coach people who are saying, like, how do you demonstrate to someone like a Sue, Lawrence, or any of the other clients you're working with these qualities above and beyond or surrounding your core skills? And how much do studios that you're working with look for it, much like Sue and Lawrence are? Like, where's that kind of middle ground on those?
Yeah, that's a great question because all the goalposts have changed, right? We used to take a person into a studio and the team around would start assessing whether they realized they were doing it or not. Is this person one of us, right? Do they fit with the team? Do they like the same lunch we like? And it's like a high school clique, really, in some places, and positive and negative around that. But there really is kind of a cultural piece of, does this new person fit in with the team? And I think also, and I've often coached this, that it's incumbent on the studio to do the onboarding properly, and the managers and everything, to make that person feel like they're welcome, because there's a lot of studies I've read and seen that say basically in the first 90 days that person's wondering, have I made the right move? So it's definitely a two-party kind of situation here, or multiple parties get involved and make sure that person feels like they're welcome. And also feedback. I've been at studios where they're not giving enough feedback, and you've got new people going, I don't know if they're appreciating me or not. I don't know.
Mhm.
And you could do that virtually or in person. You could screw that up. You know what I mean? And I've worked with studios who literally, I've talked to some senior people and said, no one told me if this was the right move. I just made it. And that's a challenge. There should be some goalposts, and everyone understands who's getting the right things done. So I think, but back to your original question, I often coach people that it's better to have reviews from people you've worked with in the past that say, I don't want to sound like I'm egotistical, but somebody said this about me, and I got a pointer from this person that they said, here's what I really like about working with you. And then I think it spreads kind of the feedback to multiple sources, rather than just saying, my cat, myself, and my mom think I'm an excellent person to do the following 5 things, right? It's what's the quality of the reference there, right? Does that help, Ben? I think I might be
It
out on a
does.
branch
It
here
does
on my own.
totally, Lance. It totally does. It's funny. So, in a past life, I was teaching professional development at Seneca, where we had designed the program less around portfolio development, more around career skills and preparation. And a big part of what we talked about, because most of my students, third year, fourth year graduates, going, I have no job experience. I'm like, well,
Right.
have you worked anywhere? Oh yeah, I worked at Loblaws. I'm like, well, what'd you do at Loblaws that you think would be useful if you had a problem at the animation studio? Let's talk about these kind of like skills that you may have developed, problem solving. Oh, the order didn't come in. We had to restock the shelves a different way, or I had to deal with another person, blah, blah, blah. Like, is that something that you would draw on and be useful in this next job? How do you then talk about that? And they use, I think there was a bit of like you're kind of fluffing things up a bit. But what really we were trying to do is say, your life experiences are always going to help you, and no matter what kind of field you're in. But now it's about how do you understand, define, and create value around it, and then communicate that value. That's one side of it. And to your point, Lance, the other side of it is the studio actively listening for these things?
Mm.
And Dan, and actually Zachary has also just posted a question I'll read in a second, but Dan kind of added something here. That's a good question around like the flip from the employees market, right? Where I can just take whatever I want because everyone needs me, to, the opposite,
Yeah.
which is there's very few jobs or very few opportunities. And in
Yeah.
the middle of this, what I'm hearing from Sue, even from Lawrence, Lance, is this technical specialty is still critical. In fact, it's probably more critical now. It's like you do want to be the best you can be in that kind of particular capacity or skill set. But the layer on top that people are now starting to evaluate, if apples to apples, these people have similar experience, similar backgrounds, you're starting to evaluate, well, where else do they bring value into this equation? And how well are you communicating that value? And now I think the kind of future state of that is, how are studios starting to build on that value, build on that potential, and start to find new opportunities as these teams start to downsize? As these technologies start to make things move faster, you want that core skill set around it to be still there and nurtured. There was no statement or question there, so I'll let Lawrence respond because he's
I think it's a
nodding.
really good point, because I think there's kind of two aspects. Is you have to listen and recognize as leadership, and you have to open the door for people to let you know too. Like I remember we had an artist. He was a student in my class. We hired him on. He was a CG artist, and we had to do a giant stadium. And I'm like, okay, can you handle this? Cool, cool. And then I come in the next day, and he's got a drafting table out with drafting paper. And I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I don't know if I told you, I was an architect back in Brazil. And not only was he an architect, he ran a team of architects. And I had no idea. And this was like a huge light bulb for me, because it's like, I didn't even think to ask what this person's background is. And here in Ontario, we have a lot of people coming from different countries that tend to be quiet about what they can bring to the table.
Mm.
So for me, I think it's like we really need to be good about listening, but also kind of try and open the door a bit and say, hey, talk about where you're coming from, what you can bring to the table. Or if you're interested in doing some work in a different department, you can always let us know, kind of thing.
I'm just going to jump in because there's a great question Zachary just asked. And it's actually something I've been doing panels with another partner organization around AI, of course. And one of the interesting dynamics that's evolved from those conversations is AI is starting to replace what we'd consider to be junior level effort, right? So, back in the day, it was in VFX, it's like you're going to do roto or you're going to do wire removal. And it's like, this is your get in the door stuff. And I'm sure it's skin weights, painting weights on models and just very like, you're in the room, you're learning from the guys who are doing the really hard work, but we're going to give you some hands-on. AI replaces, and technology, again, not just AI, or these tools are starting to actually impact the need for those sorts of roles. And we have people leaving colleges looking for entry-level positions, but also fewer positions to create. Are we starting to forecast a bit of a concern here around junior level, entry-level jobs in studios when an intermediate or a senior can start doing or incorporating some of that effort into their own workflows? And how are studios going to respond to that? Or what are job seekers going to have to start thinking about if they're graduating? Because I think that could be kind of like that the boomer retirement thing, where it's like we didn't realize this second order effect until there's no junior level jobs left. Sue, I'm going to throw it to you because I think you may have some insights there.
Sure. You have to remember that to become an intermediate senior artist, you first need to be a junior artist, actually. No one comes out of the school knowing more stuff that they should, right? Like, I agree with you that with AI and enhanced technology, there are few positions that will be eliminated, but there are certain work that cannot be replaced by any technology. The human being needs to be there, right? There was a time that they were saying, well, recruitment people won't have any jobs left because so much technology, so much information available. But we know that they are still existing. They still have a long path to go, I hope, because all the technology that came in was to help to do the work, not to eliminate your job. So that the AI that is coming up and then all the new learners and technologies coming in is to help the juniors to enhance more, to grow faster, probably, not to take off their job. So a lot of time that I'm with students having my presentation and in classes, guest lectures with them, they're always coming to me and say, do you think that I'm going to have a job when I leave the school? And I'm like, yes, you will. It's not going to be like 20 years ago when the job will be like running after you, but like you will have to be proactive. Do your internship, do your co-op, keep building your portfolio, keep working on your personal projects, make sure that you are learning what's coming up so you can integrate that into your portfolio, not to be eliminated by that. So that's the most important thing. So at the end of the day, if you come to me and say, hey, are there juniors in the future? Yes, they are, with just a little bit different skill set, let's say.
Right. I love the attitude, Sue, around this is an augmentation, it's not a replacement. I see, Lawrence and Lance also nodding their heads. We are running low on time. So I actually going to have to put a pin in it because I feel like we could do another hour here. But we covered really good ground. So first of all, there's a couple questions still kind of pouring through the chat. Ann Denemy, who's helped organize this on behalf of CASO, has suggested if you do have any other follow-up questions for the panel, please feel free to email them through, and we'll see what we can do to kind of pass them to the various panelists for a bit of light feedback, should you feel like there's an opportunity there. I do want to thank Lance, Sue, Lawrence for taking time out of your lunch to have a very deep conversation. I think this is, wonderful insights here. We barely scratched the surface, but I think some really important takeaways. So hopefully someone's AI assistant has recorded all this for us. If not, I know that CASO will be making this available after the fact on our YouTube channel and on social media. So yeah, we won't be sending the recording, but we'll be sending a note out at some point, or you go like and subscribe on YouTube to get this video and share it with all your friends. So thank you, all three of you, for this. This is part one of what we're hoping to be a multi-series or multi-event series over the course of the year. So please, everyone, join the newsletter for CASO if you can, so you can get updates on what's coming down the pipe for the next talk, which is very likely going to be a talk in March around AI, because eventually we have to actually just face the beast head on. I also want to just a couple quick notes here. CASO has partnered with TMU, Toronto Metropolitan University, to help support a production management course. So if you're at all interested in either taking part, if you're a studio who's interested in maybe sending some of your team, or if you're even interested in helping teach, please reach out to Ann Denemy. She would have been who you RSVP'd. So you guys can get more information and look in your newsletter for more information there. We are also relevant to this conversation, launching a job board with our partners at Corral through CASO. This will be an animation VFX specific job board that's going to be launching in the next month or so. So please pay attention for that, because that's going to be very exciting, and we'll be doing a bunch of announcements around that particular tool. And that's it. We've hit the 1 o'clock mark. It's time for everyone to go turn back into turkeys and do your work. I hope everyone's had a great time today. Thanks again, and we'll see you guys next month.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks,
Thank you for
everyone.
having us. Bye.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Stop recording.